coming to you from a friend's house. She's done mission work in Israel and lived there for quite a few years, off and on. And we're going to be interviewing her today and just see what she has to say about Israel. Dee Anderson, Dolores, she goes by Dee. And, all right, let's see. First question. Tell us about your call to the ministry.
Okay. Well, my call concerns you because I had went on one trip to Israel on a tour, and then you got in touch with me and asked me if I could be your roommate.
I believe it's 1998, right?
Yeah, I went first in 1996 and then 1998 with you, Sherry. And while I was over there, at the time I was a pastor of a church.
Right.
And so while I was over there, God called me to Israel, to the people and to the land. And so anyway, my husband at that time, Bob Anderson, didn't really want anything to do with Israel. And God performed a miracle for me to go the first trip. We had moved from Kentucky to Clay County, Alabama, where he was from originally, and we had sold our property in Kentucky to our son. And so he had made a small down payment and was making monthly payments and had about 12 years to pay it off. And so when I found out that the people that I had credentials with as pastor of the church were going to make a trip to Israel, I told my husband, and he says, well, don't expect me to help you out. And I says, well, I serve a great big God that owns everything. And if he wants me to go, he'll provide the way.
Right.
And do you know, about within that week, my son called and said, Mom, Dad, would it be all right if Sheila and I pay the place off all at once this week?
Wow.
And so that was a miracle.
Yes.
And Bob realized it, and so he ended up going to New Mexico to see his brother, and I got to go to Israel. But anyway, after I got home, after being called to Israel in 1998 with you, Cherry, I got a daughter named Cheryl.
Yes.
Anyway, God called Bob to Israel. And so we made his first tour that same year.
Well.
In December. And God didn't release us from the church till 2000. And so that's when we went.
Right. And then we went in 98, and you were my roommate.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an interesting trip because
Yes.
Maybe it was 99.
No, it was 98.
Was it 98? Okay. Are you sure?
Yeah, because you and Larry went after that. Okay.
No, we went in 94.
I know, but you went again after.
Larry didn't go, I went.
You
Yeah.
went, okay.
But the year before, I had gone with a friend of mine. This was the interesting part, because I went in 94, then I went in 98 and 99. So I kind of think it was the 99 trip, but, I'm not sure. But anyway, the year before, I had gone with a friend, and a lady I had actually just met her on that trip. And so she was my roommate, and one night, about 12 o'clock, or 11 or 12 o'clock, I don't remember the exact time, she woke me up, and I was sleeping, I'm thinking, man, I just fell asleep, or feels like I just fell asleep. And I said, what time is it? And she said, oh, it's time to get up. It's 5:56 or something like that. And I looked at my phone, and I was like, or not my phone, but my clock. And I was like, Carol, it's not even 12 o'clock. And she's like, what? And I said, come look at this. And she came in there. She had got up, took a shower, washed her hair, was drying it. And we died laughing. It was so funny. Well, the next year, Dee went, and she was my roommate. And she did the same thing. She gets up, and I'm thinking, man, I feel like I just went to sleep. And, I mean, in the same motel, too. Same place. Tiberius, I believe it was.
No, actually, we flew Jordanian Air, and we were.
Was it in Jordan?
Amman.
Okay, well, wherever it was the same place, same hotel that we had been in the year before. I'm like, and she's in there, and I'm hear her getting ready, you know, and she took a shower, and I'm thinking, man, I must have been awful tired when I went to sleep because, you know, it just didn't feel like I slept all night. Well, I looked at my clock, and I'm like, Dee! I said, do you know what time it is? Yeah, it's 5 something or 6 or something like that. And I'm like, no, it's not.
I think I said midnight.
Yeah, it was something like that, yeah. And she's like, are you sure? And I said, yes, ma'am, I'm positive. And then I died laughing. And she said, why are you laughing? I said, because this happened, the exact same thing in the exact same place happened last year. It was so funny, though. We laughed for the longest time. I don't know if she fell back asleep or not.
Well, you know, didn't somebody knock on the wall and...
Yeah, somebody was knocking on the wall wanting us to hush and laughing at midnight. So they had some pretty grouchy people in that motel. But anyway, it was so funny that it happened twice in a row, 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
That was hilarious. Tell us the name of your ministry, and if somebody wanted to contact you, how to contact you.
Yes, it was, the name of it was Longing for Zion.
Longing for Zion Ministries, okay. And if someone wanted to contact you, say for instance they wanted to get you to their church or something, or, you know, or...
Well, when we were in Israel, my husband and I, we ministered to the Jews, and God called me there to love the Jewish people and to minister to them and to tell them about Jesus when I got the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And but anyway, we just knew we were called, and we went every year. It wasn't are we going or if we go, but when are we going? And God took care of us. He supplied our needs. We stayed 6 months at a time. And anyway, He just took really good care of us. And we, the first week we were there, we met up with a missionary lady that was in charge of the apartment we rented, and for a week, for 3 weeks rather. And that same week, she took us up to Tiberias. So we ended up at a prayer house in Tiberias where the Sea of Galilee is. Right. And so anyway, I was just there. That was our first trip on our own. And didn't know anybody. And so they gave us a room at the prayer house. So one of the men that was there took Bob out to show him around. And while he was gone, I was in the room and I was praying and reading the Bible, and God gave me a sermon. Wow. And I said, Lord, I know this is a sermon, but I'm in a strange country, and I don't know anybody. And the phone rang about an hour later after they got home, the phone rang, and this man said, Sister Anderson, I'm so-and-so, told me his name. And he said, my wife and I have a little work going down the Sea of Galilee. Would you preach for us tomorrow? Wow. I said, yes, I will. And they stopped by and picked us up. Wow. And so they wanted us to come back to Tiberias and work with them. And so after we got all of our business taken care of, about 6 weeks later, we went back to Tiberias. And anyway, their work had closed since we'd been gone, but they let us stay with them about 6 weeks. And then we were asked to come to the prayer house by Kate Goodman that had that ministry. Mm-hmm. And so we went to the prayer house for the rest of the 6 months, 4.5 months. And anyway, we hosted the Russian Jews on, I think it was on every Thursday. We didn't speak Russian or Hebrew, and they didn't speak English, but we had a language of love. Wow. So, and there were several Ukrainian Jews. You know, they were there, they were born again Christians at the Messianic congregation. Wow.
And if, like I said, if anybody were to want to contact you, you want to give your address where they could contact you at this address if they wanted to get a hold of you. Like say they might want you to come minister or talk about Israel or something like that.
Well, I'd like to, but I'm getting ready to move to out of state.
Okay.
But I'd love to. I'm available, whoever would like to hear.
Okay, well, you could just contact me.
Yeah, you can contact
Yeah, on my YouTube channel then, and I could always get a hold of her. That would work. Okay, what made you interested or spurred you to go to Israel to start with? What piqued your interest about it, or what caught your eye, or I don't know how to ask the question. Just what caused you to want to go?
Well, I was a Christian for several years, and many years actually. And Christians just normally love Israel.
It should.
And so that's why I wanted to go. They were God's chosen people, and Jerusalem was the city God chose.
Right.
And above all the cities in the world.
Right. And a lot of the world don't like that. They don't like the fact that God chose Israel. They don't like the fact that Jerusalem was chosen by God and given to the Jewish people because it belongs to God. And God said, I'll give it to whomsoever I will. And He chose Israel to give it to. And the world doesn't like that. That's why you see the problems you do. All the places that was bought by the Israelites, like Jerusalem, the Temple Mount was bought during King David's time. He bought it from Ornan, the Jebusite.
Yeah.
And Joseph's tomb, where Joseph was buried, that was bought by Jacob. Abraham bought Hebron. He bought the cave of Machpelah to bury him and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah. And so they were bought by them. They weren't just given them, but God gave it to them. But it was bought by an Israelite. And the world doesn't like that because the world is not controlled by God. The world is controlled by Satan. And Satan hates God. He hates God's people, whether it be Israel or whether it be the child of God. So, yeah. How did you prepare yourself to get ready to go? I know you didn't spend the whole year there, but you spent a lot of time. You'd go sometimes 3 months, 6 months at a time, a couple once or twice, I think.
Several times.
Yeah, how did you prepare yourself for this change in your life?
Well, to begin with, I knew there would be a lot of walking from the tours. And so I went to the city park in Ashland, and I started walking on their walking trail, preparing myself physically. And when we got there, we still didn't know what we were supposed to do. We just knew He called us.
Right.
And so, but through prayer, and reading the Word, just being a Christian, we, I guess you could call that preparing. But anyway, that's what we done.
And I think you said under some teaching from me, because I had been studying for years and years and years, that may have helped some too. Do you think that the teaching that you said under for that year, that I would come to your house and teach you, do you think that helped you?
For a whole year.
Yeah, do you think that helped prepare you some too?
Yes. That's because you have a great knowledge of Israel and the Bible concerning Israel.
Okay.
Plus, you came several times. You was in Israel when we were there too at the same time.
Yeah, and that was wonderful. That was a wonderful experience. We had a lot of fun. We shared a lot of times in Israel, walked the streets, and had some sad times, had some funny times, and I will never forget the time when you were staying, I think, on what was Abraham Lincoln Street? Was that what it was? Yeah, and we were walking, and you lived there, and so you started down the street, and I said, I don't think that's the way we're supposed to go back to it. And you're like, yeah, it is. I said, I think we're supposed to go down this other street. And so I'm thinking, well, she lives here. She should know. But it was the wrong street. And we got down a little ways, and you're like, this is the wrong street.
Really? I don't remember.
Yeah, I didn't remember that. I think what it was, we were talking and got you distracted. And because a lot of the streets look alike. A lot of them do, and I think that's what happened. You got distracted and thought you were on a different street. But we found we didn't get lost though. We figured it out. We went back and went the other way. So,
Can I
but it was
interject
funny
something?
though. Yeah.
For those that don't know it, we lived on Abraham Lincoln Street, and it connected with George Washington Street
It did.
in Jerusalem.
But it was funny. It was funny because, you know, she lived there and I was just visiting and I'm like, I think that's the right street. Yeah. And ended up it wasn't. But, you know, it was okay. But it was funny. We got a good laugh out of it. It was
Can I
funny.
say something else about
Sure.
Jerusalem?
Yes.
I'll have to start with telling about Bob dying. My husband, we went in 2005. We started out in 2000 on our own, and this was in 2005 December. And my husband unexpectedly died. He had a blood clot that made him have a heart attack.
Right.
And so we had our apartment for a whole year in Tiberias at that time. And God had moved us back there from Jerusalem because our call had become Jerusalem. After that first year in Tiberias, he spoke to my husband first and said, it's Jerusalem. And so he spoke to me after we got home and says, I want you in Jerusalem. And so we did. But anyway, when we went back, our friends in Tiberias, they were our best friends we met in Jerusalem in 2000. And they wanted us to come and work with them. And they would invite us every week. We would catch the bus to Tiberias. And every week, for about 3 weeks, it got more and more peaceful. And so I said, honey, should we look for an real estate to get an apartment? He said, yes. And we found an ideal apartment with people that love me. And anyway, we lived there 1 week and he died. And so I had a whole year to have that apartment and come home and then go back and come home, go back. And finally, near the end of the year, I knew I had to go back to Jerusalem. And so I got in touch with the real estate that we had used in Jerusalem. And the mother was gone out of the country, but the son was there. And he told me about 2 different apartments, and I knew where both of them were. And one was right next door to the official residence of the Prime Minister.
Wow.
And so
That was a blessing.
I wanted to look at that one, so I did. And God put me next door to the official resident of the Prime Minister of Israel.
Well, that made you very protected.
Yes, and also I made a year's lease, and then at the end of the year I made another year's lease. So that's an awesome thing.
And you couldn't go down that street without permission.
No, you couldn't. You had, if you brought your car on that street, it had to be checked out. And anyway, they kept a close watch. If you had somebody coming to put the TV or anything, they had to call me to make sure I was expecting someone. And so it was very protected.
That's good. All right. What is your favorite place in Israel?
Jerusalem.
It's kind of in your heart, in your head. Do you have a favorite verse about Jerusalem, maybe in the Bible that kind of goes with the feeling you have for Jerusalem?
I have a favorite song.
Okay.
Jerusalem.
Yeah. All right. How many times in all have you been?
Goodness, I lost track at 20. I think, and most of it's to live.
Yeah.
For 6 months or 3 months, you know. But probably about 23 times.
Okay. Did you make any special friends there?
I did.
Okay. You want to tell us about that?
Yes. We went to a Pentecostal meeting at a home on Shabbat, Friday night. Shabbat starts when the sun goes down on Friday. And they lived outside of Jerusalem, so they would come pick us up and take us, and they had this real big house, and it was a meeting place for a service, for a Shabbat meal, and I usually took something, and then they had a service afterwards, and so we would go there, and they were very nice people. Most of them, there was some Jewish people there. There was Americans that had lived there long enough. Their children were born there and they were grown.
Wow.
And so anyway, we went there. And then we went to the Baptist church, Jerusalem Baptist Church on Sunday.
That was
that's
a cool place.
The first Sunday I went, the deacon met us at the door, me and Bob, and he looked at me and he said, "Do you sing?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he says, "Well, we want you to sing for us." So I ended up being on the worship team and singing special songs. And so every time we went to Jerusalem, we were Baptist, but at home in America we're Pentecostal.
But that church is doing a lot. The Baptist Church in Jerusalem, they have a sports team. Mm-hmm. They go all over Bethlehem, West Bank, and they go to other countries and help the young people. They have the games there, so they're really accomplishing a lot. They're reaching a lot of people for God, which is, it doesn't depend on the denomination. It depends on children of God who are doing something for God. Right. You know what I'm saying? Right. I mean, you can call yourself anything, but if you're doing nothing for God, you're not accomplishing anything. But this church, I feel like, is really accomplishing a lot because they because of this sports team they have, they're able to reach a lot of kids, and which to me I think is awesome.
Yes.
Okay. What did you, when you went to Israel, what did you feel like you wanted to accomplish, or what do you feel like you did accomplish while you were there?
Well, it actually is a place where you mostly have, it's called like a friendship ministry, because you have to you just can't confront them right off with Jesus is Lord,
Right.
Because the Jews still believe that the Messiah hasn't came yet.
Right.
The majority of them do.
Right.
And so I had a one good friend named Victoria. She lived in the apartment building where we lived in our first apartment. And so Bob and I both, as time went by, she would have us over to her apartment and she'd have all these refreshments out for us. And we would take her a plant or something like that, or flowers, which flowers are very cheap on the streets of Jerusalem.
But
fresh flowers.
But they kind of breeded the smell out of a lot of them too. You buy rose, you don't smell anything. So, but they're trying to get that back in there, so maybe they'll get the smell back in. I hope so.
And anyway, Victoria, I had a neighbor that the real estate man introduced us to, and he said if we had to be gone, she could watch out for our apartment. And it was on the 3rd floor, so thank God we were a lot younger when we went. And but anyway, Victoria could speak English, so she would translate for me and my friend, my neighbor. And the way God touched me with my neighbor was we just moved in, and Bob bought me a bouquet of flowers at what they call the shuk. It's the what is the name?
It's an open air market. Open air market.
Yeah, it's got another name.
Yehuda.
Yeah, that's it. And he'd bought me a bouquet of flowers, and the thought come to me on the way back to our apartment, what if I give them to that lady, my neighbor? And so when I asked Bob, would that be all right? And he said, sure. So when we got back, I rang their doorbell, and they were from Bulgaria. And they didn't speak English, and we still didn't speak Hebrew yet. And so anyway, her husband, Ari, came to the door, and I says, her name, I says, and she walked in about the time, and she saw me holding the flowers out, and she got a real big smile on her face, and she became really close to me, and she would come ring our doorbell, and she would have something in her hands, some kind of food or something, and then one time she brought stuff to fix something at my house, and she showed me how to fix it, and then one day, a few months later, I went over there. No, she came and got me. She rang my doorbell, got me, and took me into her apartment. And she had two big things of goodies and sweets and stuff. And then she hugged, and she pointed to me, and she hugged me, and she says, her first name, which I can't think of, but she says, loves, in English, Dolores.
Oh.
And then she said her name again, loves Bob. And so I said, and I said, Dolores, Ahav, Eri. And then I said, Dolores, Ahav, Stella was her name, Stella. And we hugged, and so that just bound us together.
Wow, that's so much
and
awesome.
then Victoria, getting back to her, Bob and I, when she would have us over to her apartment, we would tell her about Jesus. And so we ended up telling her everything about Jesus. He was a Messiah. He loved her. We told her how we got born again. And anyway, so I don't know if she ever accepted Jesus. It didn't go that far because they don't let you, you know.
Right.
But anyway, she died. And I tried to give her the word. I had given her the spoken word, but I had a Bible in Hebrew in my purse, and Bob had taken her a plant, and so she loved the plant. So after that, I said, Victoria, I have another gift for you if you'll accept it. And when she says, oh, another gift, and she's excited, and when I took it out, and she kept looking, and she, no, don't make me take that. So hopefully before she died, because she had to go in the nursing home for a while before she died, hopefully she turned to Jesus.
I hope so. Okay, do you feel like there's anything major that you learned while you were there in Israel? I mean, taking the whole time that you were going and you were there, do you feel like there was something major that you learned? A life lesson or something spiritually? I mean, you know.
I learned how awesome God is.
True.
He took such good care of us. He protected us. Oh, I don't want to leave this out.
Okay.
When we first moved to Jerusalem from Tiberias, the second Intifada started. And the Intifada is the uprising by the Palestinians, where they blow up themselves to kill Jews. And anyway, we lived right downtown Jerusalem in a nice apartment building, about 2 blocks off of the main street. And anyway, there was buses blowed up, car bombings, there was restaurants blowed up, and so God protected us, but the main thing He done for us, we had no fear.
That's good.
I can honestly say I never experienced one moment of fear with all that blowing up and people committing suicide and killing a lot of Jews. And I've been there also after Bob died. And anyway, when he died, God gave me a scripture. Like I said, He moved us to Tiberias for that. And God gave me a scripture, and it's Psalms 46:1. For God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And when he died there, they came and called the ambulance. We was at our friend's house then. we met in Jerusalem, and they moved to Tiberias. And anyway, they called the ambulance, and they came and worked on him, and he never did survive, and so they took him to the hospital, and we followed behind. And when I got to the hospital, they told me my husband was clinically dead, but he had a faint pulse, so they were going to try.
And you were saying about the Jewish couple?
The Jewish family?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, when they let me go in and see Bob for a minute, and my friends Harold and Juanita that I had met in Jerusalem, we moved there for, they went in with me, and just 1 minute to see him, and they walked out, and then I did, and I was crying, and one of the Jewish boys, their sons, a young man, and he come up and took me in his arms and held me when I cried.
And that's very unusual because Jewish men they don't
touch Gentile women.
They don't touch any women.
The religious Jews.
You're right.
And he held me while I cried, and then we went out, and then but when this family he was one of them that was waiting with his family and his mom for his dad to die. And anyway, when they found out why we were there, they started bringing us water, Cokes, or whatever.
Wow.
And they went and got pizza and gave us some.
Wow.
And so they come back in 45 minutes and said he had passed. Well, they told me to come back in the room, and so my friends went with me, Harold and Juanita, and they told me he had passed, Bob had passed. And so we went out to the waiting room, and when the religious family, found out what happened, they all got in a big line, the mother first, and their custom is kissing you on both cheeks, and the whole family came up one by one and kissed each one of us on both cheeks and held us, told us they were sorry. And when that young man came up, his turn, the one that held me, and when I was crying in the other room, I told him, I said, I said, I've got 2 sons in America, and they would be so proud to know that a Jewish young man is holding their mother right now. Well, I cry. And anyway, I mean, their hearts were just opened up to us.
That's wonderful.
And so when we got out the door, we were leaving the waiting room, there was the young driver of the ambulance, and I didn't even know he was still around. And he said, "Ma'am, do you have a place to bury your husband?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Well, can I help you?" And I said, "Would you please?" And he said, "Yes, I will." And that, I believe, is why God even though we were called to Jerusalem, he led us to Tiberias area because he knew what Bob was going to be called home to him, and that I would have help there.
Wow.
And so he took the pastor and his wife, who had been there after we got there, we called them, and my friends Harold and Juanita,
Can you speak a little bit louder?
And me to the kibbutz, Ashdod Yaakov.
Ashdod Yaakov.
Ashdod
Kibbutz
Yaakov.
Ashdod Yaakov.
We would call it Jacob.
Yeah.
But
right.
Ashdod
Yaakov.
Yaakov. And anyway, he helped us make arrangements to bury Bob at the kibbutz there. A beautiful cemetery there. I think you've been there, right?
Oh, yes, I have. It's a beautiful
And
place.
it overlooks, it's like a cliff.
Right, and you can
And
see
it
into Jordan.
overlooks the country of Jordan.
Yeah.
And so anyway,
It's a beautiful place. I mean, it's just gorgeous.
it is. And so God blessed me. He was with me the whole time,
Right.
even coming home on the airplane. It was prophesied after the funeral. We went to my friend's house, and they had a piano, and everybody wanted to sing and worship.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did for about an hour, and then I went to the bedroom.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was prophesied to that I would not be alone on my way home.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got on the plane, they put me in the place where you wait for the bathroom, and it just had 2 seats. The other places were 3 seats on both sides. And so people would just stop and talk to me, and so
Wow.
I'd tell them what was on my heart. My husband just died, you know. And one woman was from Tel Aviv, and she said, "Why don't you get up and walk around with me? I'm walking around the plane." And then I dozed off a little bit after I got back, and I opened my eyes, and there was a young religious woman.
Wow.
And you can tell the married women because they have their heads like
Right,
a hat,
right. Yes.
like America in 1953.
Yes.
And so anyway, she says, "You mind?" I says, "Oh no." And I told her what happened. And do you know, she went, and she was about 4 rows up. She went and got her stuff, came back and sat by me the rest of the trail.
Wow.
And when I got to, finally to New York, there was all kinds of room, but the plane, I missed my next flight because the plane was late.
Uh-huh.
And so I made arrangements to go on the next flight to Atlanta. And I sat down, and this young woman, real young, like college graduate age, came and sat by me. And she was a student at Auburn University. And so God kept his word. He had someone with me all the way.
Wow. Okay, when you went there, was there a culture shock?
No, because I had been there before.
Okay. All right, and what advice would you give to someone who is planning or preparing to go to Israel to do God's work there?
Well, first of all, keep your prayer life up. And just, you know, God has put a love, I believe, in each one of his people's heart for Israel, for the Jewish people. And just do whatever you need to do to prepare, but mainly don't try to get ahead of God. Wait on God to open the way.
All right, that's a good thing right there. Good advice. Wait on God, because so many times when we feel called to do something for God, we want to get ahead of him. We want to just jump out there and do it, and because God tells us that he's calling us to do something doesn't necessarily mean right that minute.
No.
You know, sometimes there's a waiting process, a preparing process, a getting ready process, and we need to wait on God to open the doors. Let's not try to open them ourselves. So,
Yes.
yeah, I think that's really good advice to someone who might be planning or preparing. And it doesn't have to be to Israel. Whatever ministry or mission work God's called you to do, like she said, wait on God. Don't jump out there. Give him time to work. Give him time to prepare you. Give him time to even get the money for you to go. I mean, because not everybody has the money to do mission work. So
we had a 2-year wait. I got called when me and you went to Israel.
Right.
In 98, I got called. And then he didn't release me from being the pastor of the church till 2000. And then in February of 2000, he opened the way for us to go.
So that's her advice, to wait on God, and I agree totally. If that sounds like the best advice you can give someone who's planning on doing a ministry for God. And we're going to show you some things because she told me about a rock earlier that we mentioned about, because I was going to ask a question about has anybody ever given you anything that was special to you, and can you tell me about that?
Yes, it was that rock. He had a ministry of painting on Jerusalem stone. He was a Jewish man, and he played the accordion at the meetings that they had on Shabbat evening. And anyway, he He made this specially for me.
Okay. And you told me earlier that you went sometimes on Shabbat to someone's house, and I think you mentioned that.
Yes.
And that's where you met him?
Well, I met him at a different apartment. Jerusalem doesn't really have single houses.
Right.
It has apartment buildings. Everything's a stone. There may be a little bit of wood on the balcony, but mostly everything is of stone.
Jerusalem stone.
Housing.
Yeah. And they call it the Jerusalem stone, they call it a living stone because it absorbs water and stuff like that. That's pretty interesting.
And they don't realize what they're doing.
No, they don't. They really don't realize. They call it a breathable stone, and they have to use it on all of their buildings. But it absorbs water, it absorbs heat, and it's so beautiful. When you look at the city, and that just gold and limestone pops out there. It's just, it's gorgeous. So,
you know, they have the lion. They have the concrete lions in different places, and even on the trash cans they have a lion. And they don't know that the Lion of Judah, Jesus, but they're going to know him.
Right. They will. Yes,
the Bible
definitely
tells us in New Testament that all of the Jews will become to the Lord.
Yes, and Zacharias tells us that as well. Maybe it doesn't say it in the same words as the New Testament does, but it does tell us that the Messiah will appear and they'll all know him in a roundabout way, I guess you could say. But okay, and we're gonna take a look at the stone and some of the things you've got. So I thank you for letting me do this interview. It's been really fun, and even though some of the stuff I've heard, some of it I haven't, and so it's been really interesting. I hope that all of y'all enjoy this interview, and I hope you watch it all the way through because it's really good. Okay, now what was it that he gave you that you want to show us?
Do you want me to hold it, or you?
No, I can get it. You want? And you told us that you met this man there that was that did this, painted it himself. That's cool. And I noticed you have some other things here, some really nice stuff.
I bought this in Kentucky at a thrift store.
Oh, wow. Other things here.
There's a license plate my grandson gave me, Israel.
And the wall. Where did you get the one on the wall?
That's one you gave me.
Oh, I did? I got so much stuff. And there's a mezuzah. And some camels. And some anointing oil. And a kippah and an Israel tag. She's got a lot of stuff. Bethlehem. A flag on the bottom. It's got some really nice stuff from Israel. Well, okay, I'm glad that you let me interview you. I'm glad I finally got to do it. And I hope the people really enjoy this and get something out of it. I'm sure they will. But I just want to thank you for letting us be part of your life and mission. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Y'all be blessed and have a wonderful day.